Hi, class. So we are on chapter 10 this week. This is a rough chapter. If you have taken the child abuse chapter or class for a whole semester, then you are going to be very well versed in this topic. Thankfully, we're only spending a week on it because it's a hard one to think about for too long. But we are going to be talking about child abuse this week. If that is a trigger for you because it's something that you've dealt with in your past, I'm sorry. And just be kind to yourself as you work through this material. Let me go ahead and share my screen here. Okay, I'm going to scooch back up here. Okay. So some of our objectives for this chapter is to identify the difference between discipline or guidance and punishment, look at what the different types of abuse and neglect are, understand risk factors, and the importance of reporting. So one of the important distinctions we need to make is between discipline and punishment. You have a discussion on it this week. I think discipline, we could also even change that word and call it guidance, because discipline really has a negative connotation in our society now. It seems to be very synonymous with punishment, unfortunately. But the actual definition is rooted in the word disciple, which is to train or enforce obedience that corrects, shapes, or develops acceptable patterns of behavior. And really, that's what we're doing when we're teaching children or when we're guiding them. And so I almost like the term guidance better, because I think that just creates a different visual especially when we're talking with families and how to help them guide their children. Punishment, on the other hand, this is a negative response to what the observer considers wrong. And I think that that's an important distinction to make, because we're talking about the adult believes the child's do something wrong, but it's really an opinion that adult has. Unfortunately, a lot of times when an adult tends to only think of punishment, they are really looking through a lens of finding what's wrong, looking through that lens of having expectations that aren't appropriate for that child. And so they assume what the child is doing is wrong or inappropriate, but it's not always. So I think that's really important to realize, is that it's based on what the observer considers, but that phrase in itself is really saying it's an opinion, right? Unfortunately, though, punishment lends itself to harsh treatment. So that usually includes fear, controlling, or threats to the child. So there are 5 different types of abuse and neglect that we are going to cover: physical abuse, emotional verbal abuse, sexual abuse, physical neglect, or emotional and psychological neglect. So we're going to start with some signs of physical abuse. So you're going to see frequent unexplained injuries. This is why daily health checks are so important, because you need to be able to just get some eyes on that child's body, right? And make sure that this is not happening all the time. There are specific injuries that are developmentally appropriate, right? Young children tend to have shin and knee and elbow or forearm bruising because they fall a lot. They run into stuff. They are physically active, and that just means that they ram their bodies into things sometimes. So if there's a bone near your skin, it's likely that that's going to get bruised at some point in early childhood. But if you're looking at the inside of their arm right here, where there's this like soft tissue, their stomach, chest area, areas that don't get bumped and shouldn't bruise easily, and you're seeing injuries there, that's a concern, and especially frequent and unexplained. So again, you're talking with the family. Hey, how'd this bump happen? How'd this bruise get there? And especially if their story doesn't check out, right? If their story is something that is not appropriate, like, for example, we will have very small babies with skull fractures in the hospital. And the parents will say that they rolled off the couch. Well, babies don't roll when they're 2 months old, right? And so when a parent or a family member or an adult is saying that the child did something that developmentally, physically, cognitively, they could not possibly do yet, that's when you need to question that story. If the child's old enough to talk, then you need to ask them their version of it too. Ask the family as well. Document everything. Wearing inappropriate clothes to hide injuries. So this would look like, long sleeves in the summer. Again, trying to hide bruising. So asking them, hey, what's with the long sleeve? Or during the daily health check, roll those sleeves up just to get eyes on them. Unusually fearful of adults or parents. So they are, maybe wincing when you raise your hand, but you're not even coming at them. Or they might not want to go with that family member anymore, where used to they seem to have a good relationship, but now they don't want to go home with them. Avoids explanations for injuries. So they just don't want to tell you. They're quiet about it. They won't make eye contact. They won't open up. Extreme behavior. So a child that might have been very outgoing is now more withdrawn and anxious. A child that was normally calm and easygoing is now becoming more aggressive and disruptive with the other children. Sometimes you're going to see some of these behaviors before you actually see injuries. You might see that the child appears malnourished or dehydrated. Sometimes physical abuse comes in the form of withholding appropriate food and hydration. And they lack giving and receiving affection. Okay, signs of emotional and verbal abuse. So you might see a child that reacts without emotion, because emotion is jaded for them now. They don't understand what appropriate emotion is for certain situations. So they could see, a dead bird, let's say, is in your play yard, and many children are very distressed about this, and they don't have a reaction to it, right? They're not at all. And again, you're going to see multiples of these things. One kid that doesn't care about the dead bird doesn't mean they're being abused or one time, right? You're going to see signs in many ways. The behavior is unusually adult-like. So they don't have the same sort of emotional outbursts that we expect maybe for young children. We see, high peaks of extreme emotion, like happiness and low sadness a lot of times. And they're just very neutral, right? Or unemotional. They're just generally unhappy. They maybe don't smile or laugh often. Again, you might see extreme behaviors. So if this is something new, if this abuse is new to their life, their behavior may change. Emotional abuse can cause delayed development. So if this is something that's been going on for years, you might actually notice that this child is also smaller in stature, seems behind emotionally and intellectually. They lack giving and receiving affection. So again, any kind of abuse is going to have some characteristics that are similar across the board, because it creates a child that doesn't know how to respond emotionally and socially. Signs of sexual abuse. So you're going to see a child that might have stains in their underwear. That could be from either some bleeding, or it could be even that they have accidents frequently. This child may have difficulty getting along with other children, withdrawn, they act infant-like or overly anxious. A sudden decline in school performance. So especially, again, if this is something new, children can't compartmentalize. And so what we see is that with any of these abuses, if it is something that is new to them, they especially are having trouble focusing during class because their mind continues to stay in that state of stress. If you'll think back to the TED Talk with Dr. Nadine Burke, that I have you watch in the beginning, and I might link it again in this chapter in case you didn't watch it then. Children can't compartmentalize. And so their brain stays in that stress level even when they're somewhere safe. So if school is safe, they're still stressed because they're thinking about what's happening at home or what has happened to them. So it affects their school performance. Older children could move into delinquent behaviors such as prostitution, drugs, alcohol abuse. Younger children may have complaints of itching to their private areas. You may see rapid weight loss or weight gain, depending on how the stress affects that child, right? Some people overeat and some people don't eat. And fascination with body parts. So they're going to use terms that are unfamiliar for children this age. So they are going to have names for private areas. They're going to be able to use sexual terms that they should not know, especially at younger preschool age. All right, signs of physical neglect. So bad odor, dirty clothes, they have an unclean appearance. They're often hungry. They spend a lot of time, should say alone, not alone, but alone. They have difficulty getting along with others. And some of this becomes a social situation for them because if they're unclean and dirty, other children may not want to spend time with them. And even though that sounds harsh and mean, children don't understand. They may have untreated medical conditions or dental care that needs checked on or repaired, but it just goes untreated. Clothing doesn't fit. It might either be too small because they're still wearing things they've outgrown. It could be that it's too big, so they're having to just borrow from older siblings, but they don't actually have clothes that fit them. Chronically tired. So especially if they're not getting the nutrition they need, they don't have the energy. They don't, even if they're sleeping at night, which is probably not good sleep, given the stress that they're under, they are probably so tired from the nutritional deficit that they're falling asleep in class, or they don't have the energy to play like other children do at recess. Okay. And then emotional or psychological neglect. So we're going to see them perform poorly in school. Again, the stress stays with children. All of these stresses will stay with children and they can't separate it. So they continue to be stressed, and sometimes they just don't make it to school at all. It's too hard, or nobody's making sure that they get to school. And so it doesn't happen. Young children that are forced to be their own parent are frequently absent. They may have delinquent behaviors such as stealing, vandalism, drugs, and alcohol abuse. You may see that they're more withdrawn or apathetic. They just don't care, don't have emotion about a lot of it. They don't have the energy or the reserves to care about other things. Sometimes, if they're not getting the emotional attention that they need at home, they will seek it from other people. So it could mean that they are using negative ways to get that attention, positive ways, inappropriate ways. They just want some kind of feedback from people because at home they're not getting that. And that could be for a variety of reasons. It could be that parents have depression and mental illness, drug or alcohol abuse, postpartum depression. There's so many reasons. They could have been victims of abuse themselves. Children experiencing emotional, psychological neglect seldom participate in extracurricular activities. Again, it's a lot of times they're having to be their own parents and get them places and keep them on track. And it's hard enough to get to school, let alone keep a schedule that includes other activities that they might participate in. So if we're thinking about risk factors for these types of maltreatment, there's typically 3 things that come together all at once that lead to these situations. And that has to do with adult characteristics, vulnerable children, or family and environmental stressors. So we're going to look at each one separately. So adult characteristics, you're going to see in an adult that is capable of abuse, that they may have had a history of rejection, anger, or fear. They have low self-esteem. They lack trust. They have difficulty forming long-term relationships. There may have been early marriage or pregnancy in their history. They may have mental health history, so post-traumatic stress, maternal depression, or others. These adults a lot of times will say that they do believe in the use of harsh punishment to discipline their children. They may have had anger management issues in the past or drug and alcohol addictions. Now, many, or at least some of these characteristics, we can probably see in ourselves at any point in our lives, especially our adult lives. Having these characteristics does not mean you will abuse a child. It means you're capable of it. But the reality is we all are. That's why we need to know about this and to know what to do as an alternate. Because I think every one of us could find one or two, if not more, characteristics in here that we could say, yeah, I've experienced that. Or at least at some point in your life. I think almost every mother after they have a baby goes through low self-esteem and potentially some depression, right? There's two right there. And so it's not about, I don't want anybody to hear me say, like, if you have these characteristics, you're likely to abuse a child, because that's not exactly what I'm saying. What I'm saying is it's possible that all of us have those characteristics in ourselves, and we have to know how to combat that, or what to include in our other areas of our life, or what these risk factors are, so that we can avoid that happening. When it comes to vulnerable children, again, we can probably, a lot of times we can see these in our own children sometimes. So a difficult temperament, fussiness, defiance, overly active, depending on the different developmental stage your child is in, they could hit one or all of those, right? And that's really trying. Living in a single parent home, specifically with an absent father, poverty, gender. So when it comes to sexual abuse, females are more likely, I think 4 to 1, to be abused than males. Frequent or chronic illness. So a child that is going through that. Gender nonconformity. So you've got a child that wants, a little boy that wants to dress in princess gowns, or wants to paint his nails, or a little girl that keeps her hair cut short and is a tomboy. Or in teenage years, maybe they truly are wanting to, or, feel that they are transgender, or that they do not conform to the gender that they were born with. And so that becomes a risk factor for them as well. The important thing too, like we talked about with punishment, is that these qualities may be real or imagined. So a little boy that wants to dress up in his sister's princess gown 1 or 2 times, an adult that's overreacting about that scenario is imagining that what that moment means is something much bigger than what's actually happening. Like the kid just wants to play with his sister, right? Or maybe his sister bossed him around and told him to do it. But the adult is making that a bigger situation than it is. And so sometimes these qualities are imagined even, but the adult is convinced that the child is like they are, and then responds that way. And then family stressors. So again, we've all had these things happen probably to some degree, or at least some of them. You have a birth of another child, right? Stressors are not just bad things, right? Adding a child to your life, we celebrate that. We maybe even over celebrate it to some degree, because we make it sound like it's going to be this most amazing thing ever. And then you bring the baby home and it's really, really hard. And it's really stressful. And sometimes you feel really sad about how stressful it seems and less joyous it seems. And that's just truth. So the birth of another child, while is a wonderful thing and a beautiful thing, it is very stressful. Being a single parent, military deployment, unemployment or underemployment. So underemployment meaning you have a job, but it's just not enough still to cover what you need to keep your family afloat. Illness, injury, or death in the family, poverty, moving. Even when it's a good move, it's still stressful because it changes that child's environment, it changes that family's environment. Sometimes it means new jobs and other stressors along with it. So that can be a stressor as well. The thing about these environmental stressors, though, is that sometimes they can just be simple things, like the term "the straw that broke the camel's back." Right? You can pile straw, huge amounts of straw on a camel's back, but then it's that one last piece that just does it and the camel collapses. So that one piece of straw doesn't look like a big deal, but given all the other underlying stressors, the adult characteristics and the vulnerable child characteristics, this little tiny stressor like a flat tire or like losing your keys or a broken window, that's just what sets that adult over the edge. So if we look at kind of a scenario, let's say we have an adult with a history of impulse and poor anger management, and we combine that with a child that's overly active, and this overactivity resulted in a broken window, you could see where in that moment, those three things are colliding and it erupts into abuse. So the child gets hit or whatever the form of abuse is, right? So it could be they take away another meal from that child as punishment. This is just one scenario, but again, you can see where there are moments, and we all have them, where we just, you feel on the verge, but when these three situations or these three characteristics combine, it really does send some people over the edge. And most people and most children and most situations aren't solitary, right? This person with impulse control and anger management probably has a history of abuse and probably also is living in poverty or, has other factors. It's not usually just one. Same with the child. They probably have been overly active for years or, have other issues that are underlying. And this maybe isn't the first time that something has happened because of this scenario here. And so the broken window is really the third incident this week or something like that, right? It's usually a combination of many, many things. So reporting suspicion. Now that's what's important to remember. Who should report? Teachers, right? All of you that are going to be working with young children, we are mandated reporters. And so we have to know what to look for, we have to know what the signs are, and know what to do if we see these signs. When it comes to reporting, it's really important that within early childhood education or childcare centers or schools, that there are written policies about what the procedure is when abuse is suspected. Please remember, if you're hesitant on reporting your suspicions, that if it becomes known that this child was being abused, especially for a long period of time, and that you were somebody that should have been able to know or did not report what you saw, that you can actually be criminally prosecuted for not doing anything. All reports and information are kept confidential. And you don't need to prove it. So that's really important. You do not need to feel like you are, some super sleuth or a detective And now you need to document your evidence that you see during a daily health check or behavior changes or observations that you observe in class. But you do not need to prove it. You don't need to like record the child and what they said. You don't need to, wear a wire and try to get the parent to disclose something. You just need to have the suspicion. And then that moves on to the proper authorities to actually check it out and offer the support that they need, that family needs. Sometimes it might just be parenting classes that parent needs, and it's going to set them on a better track. Sometimes a child may need to be removed for a period of time with reunification goals in place. Sometimes a child needs to be removed permanently. But either way, you're making the right choice to report your suspicion. So some reporting basics, make sure again that you are documenting what you see. Hang on, please. If there is injuries, you need to monitor that and make sure that it's documented in your observations. If the child has an explanation of how the injury occurred, then you need to write that down as well. And what the parent says too. It needs to line up. It needs to match up. Any recent or significant changes in behavior and the nature of the parent and child's interactions, whether that's positive or negative, it needs to all be documented. Okay? If you have any questions, please let me know. Thank you.